I have to say, we before I jump in, we struggled a little bit with covering St. Joseph because we just had his feast on Friday, so we felt like we celebrate him, and then on Friday we cover him Saturday. But nonetheless, he's okay. He'll get through it, and we'll honor him till December 8th, right, in the year of St. Joseph. So now I don't know if you heard the announcement on Tuesday, but they announced the first episode of season 2 for The Chosen. Are you guys all marked your calendars for Easter? You're ready to watch, right? Okay, a few nods. No, I encourage you. And it's funny. One of at the women's conference, one of our parishioners came up to me and they said, "Father, I finally, started getting into it, and I see what you're saying. I love it." And so they said, "This is what I did." And I actually got a shirt to celebrate, and not one they told me that, but I don't know if you can read it, but it says "Binge Jesus," okay? Now, so if you're going to binge, you might as well binge Jesus, right? Get rid of the Crown or the other, Ancient Aliens or whatever you binge, and binge Jesus, So they're excited because they said, I'm going to get all 8 episodes in of season 1, and then they'll be ready for season 2 on Easter. So if you haven't done it, that might be a fun way to enter into these last couple weeks of Lent. And one of the things that I've said and others have said that we appreciate about this series is that Jesus is very accessible, down to earth. It seems to be more relatable than maybe some of the other depictions of Jesus. It kind of has a sense of humor, a little sarcastic sense of humor with the apostles kind of as his buddies, And as opposed to, I guess I always think of Jesus of Nazareth, the famous the 1980s, was it, or 90s series, which is a great series, but he has those eyes that you almost feel like he's otherworldly, the actor, and I don't know if you can relate to that. And sometimes that's that sense with Jesus, that we kind of feel like he's in another world. We can't always relate to him. So again, I can encourage you to check out The Chosen to see if you have the same experience with the actor there. And remember, he's a Catholic, not that makes him better, but a better actor, but nonetheless a cool connection. And the thing is, the gospel today is one of those moments you almost feel like the otherworldly Jesus. Is he even hearing what we're talking about? The story, I love the story. So here we have the Greeks coming to Philip and saying, we want to see Jesus. He goes to Andrew, then together they go to Jesus. This great moment to meet Jesus. And then he goes there, he does his thing again, right? He starts speaking in ways that were like, did he just hear what they said? He says, it's time for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then he starts talking about the wheat. But before we write off Jesus too quickly about just, okay, he's on another plane, he's not listening, because you can almost feel like the reaction of the apostles, like, just say hello, Jesus, right? We didn't ask you to go into one of your modes, right? But just say hi, make them feel welcome. But what is the wisdom of Jesus here? And I think it has to do with, I've told this story, maybe you've heard me tell it before, but when we were getting ready for my diaconate ordination, so year 2000, 21 years ago, and it was always a big deal because your families would come into town, and a lot of arranging of plans, tours and meals and accommodations and a lot of that stuff. And so, but we got ordained on a Thursday, so Wednesday night, it was time to our families to go out for a meal and do their own thing, and we gathered with the seminary community for a holy hour of Eucharistic adoration. So there we were. My spiritual director, actually, it was the one that our class asked us to preach at our holy hour. And he gets up there and he talks about, okay, you've done all the things, you've gotten all the stuff out of the way, all the preparations. He said, there's one more thing you got to do. And so, of course, I'm like, well, we're getting ordained in 12 hours, so you better let me know so I can get this done, right? And but he says, it's time to die. It's time to die. And of course, that's what we were trying to do our whole time in the seminary and our whole spiritual lives. But and he was talking about dying to ourselves. We hear that language a lot. Dying to our sins, which these are all aspects of Lent and a focus of kind of dying to ourselves. Dying to our selfishness, dying to our passions and emotions kind of leading us and guiding us, And certainly the death of our baptism, we know that's a very significant spiritual death to our old selves and being reborn in baptism, and the way that we're part of that continued dying to ourselves at Mass every week. So yes, that was all part of it. But I think another aspect of the image that we see in this invitation that Jesus says to be like that grain of wheat that dies so that it can bear much fruit is in the dying of our suffering, our human suffering. And we've talked about this before, but I just couldn't help but see Jesus. They asked to see Jesus, and he's saying to them, if they want to see me really, and not just have a nice introductory conversation, and if they want to, if you want them to see Jesus, me and you have to die. You have to go through a transformation. You have to be given new hearts, like we hear in the first reading today. The prophet Ezekiel, God promises, I will give you new hearts. That all those other ways we talked about just a moment ago are ways we get those new hearts, those fleshy hearts, and replace the stony hearts. But a real way that God helps transform our hearts is through our suffering. I think there's such an amazing, profound wisdom that God has said, the result and consequence of your sin, original sin and your actual sin and death, and suffering, I'm going to make that suffering an instrument of creating a new heart for you. If you'll let it, if you'll be conscious and intentional about seeing it happen and giving me the grace and the opening to do it, if you'll make it your offering. So I think that's part of what we see. We can't escape the suffering emotionally, spiritually, and obviously with the pandemic and everything we've been through these last few years, it's inescapable. It's part of our human broken condition. But Jesus says, I'll make it the way to give you a new heart. In fact, you might not be able to get the full, fleshy, living heart that I want for you without the suffering. That's the reality of the second reading. In the Hebrews, this year I've just been so much more struck by this, that, Jesus was, he was made obedient through his suffering. It wasn't a side option like, oh, this was a nice thing for Jesus to do or just show us how much he loved us, but it was actually part of the process to perfect him in obedience, in love. And that because he took on the fullness of our human condition. And he wants the same thing. And so again, for us to be able to see Jesus more fully and not just be introduced to him and kind of have a superficial relationship with him, to die and to allow our suffering to be a part of the process that transforms our stony hearts, to give us those new hearts. And then what? Others are able to see Jesus more fully in us. So we come here today to this Mass and we say, Jesus, we want to see you. And yes, we see him in such beautiful ways in every Mass, in the Word, in each other, in the sacrament, in the Eucharist. But there's another element, I think, of helping us see him and be seen in us when we this week, whatever that suffering comes, that we allow it to be a source of our transformation and so be given those new hearts. So I hope we'll keep that in mind as we embrace the Word and the readings today, as we embrace and hear that image that to be those grains of wheat that die, and then through that to bear much fruit, because we've seen Jesus more fully with our new hearts. Others have seen Jesus in us through our new hearts. And in so doing, I think we'll really get to understand what Jesus was responding and what it means to really see Jesus.